live, so.
We need to get eyes on Judy.
Judy? I thought she was next.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Executive Director of the WGA, Jack Waldorf.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everybody here today as we convene to celebrate 40 years of bipartisanship, 40 years of collaboration, and 40 years of advancing Western priorities across the region and in our nation's capital. So put it another way, we're here to celebrate 40 years of Western Governors Association. As Scott said, my name is Jack Waldorf, and I have the distinct privilege of serving as the 6th Executive Director here at WGA. And I'll be honored later when a number of my predecessors will accompany me on stage for discussion. WGA represents governors of the 22 westernmost states and territories and is an instrument of the governors for bipartisan development, policy development, information exchange, collective action on the issues of critical importance to the Western United States. This mission serves as the cornerstone for what we do daily here at WGA. And as you'll hear today and throughout the week, the organization represents so much more. WGA serves as a reputable convening authority as it brings together thought leaders and experts across the region and the nation to examine the unique challenges facing the West and offering unique solutions to address them. But perhaps WGA is best known as an effective bridge builder, bringing together Western governors from different viewpoints and different political affiliations through a forum that fosters bipartisan collaboration, consensus, and to advance shared priorities. The West remains vast land full of beauty and promises, but it's also a land full of historical complications and distinct regional challenges that often require a unified approach to help solve them. The history of Western governors convening and collaborating on regional issues is not a new concept, but dates back before the turn of the 20th century. And for over a century, Western governors have come to realize that speaking with a collective, bipartisan voice on issues of shared importance echoes far louder across the West and in Washington, D.C. than does a single partisan one. And after many unifying actions and organizational iterations set forth by Western governors, WGA was officially incorporated as an association back in 1984. We hope today will provide you with additional history and anecdotes that will offer more insight into what comprises this organization. This year's 40th anniversary celebration serves as an opportunity to share what we believe to be the best untold story in American politics, and to celebrate the historical bipartisan ethos and collaborative leadership that Western governors embody in an otherwise volatile national political landscape. To help us tell the story, we'll hear from current and former governors who embody this bipartisan ethos and collaborative leadership while shepherding WGA throughout the past 4 decades as a governor-led and governor-driven organization. We'll also hear from former WGA executive directors, and yours truly, who help lead this organization and support scores of Western governors over the past 4 decades to advance the Western priorities. Our final discussion will include a conversation with current and former governor-appointed staff members who comprise of WGA's all-important Staff Advisory Council. Together, these individuals not only play a vital role with the WGA policy development process, but are critical to the day-to-day functionality of the organization. These discussions will showcase and highlight WGA's proud heritage as a bipartisan organization that celebrates our past, our present, and our future. And speaking of our future, I want to take a moment to recognize the nearly 30 Western Governor Leader Institute delegates in audience today. These young leaders represent Western states and territories and were selected by Western Governors Foundation to serve as this year's cohort of the Wiggly delegates, where they will learn about the value of leadership across the West over the next several days. Just earlier today, these amazing young leaders had the opportunity to hear from former governors about their experiences as Western leaders, and will be joining us for WGA's annual meeting, which kicks off tomorrow afternoon. Hope to see you all there. After having a chance to meet with these bright and inspiring future leaders last night and again this morning, I am proud to report that this region is in great hands under their leadership for years to come. Delegates, please stand and be recognized. We are so grateful that you're here today, and we hope to learn as much from you as you take away from WGA this week. A lot of folks deserve credit for their work in making today happen, and I just wanted to take a moment to recognize them. I wanted to first recognize the WGA we are today, and I can't thank you enough for your commitment and your hard work towards this event. And I also want to thank you, as current staff, to be representing the stewards of today's WGA, and for doing it so skillfully and with the utmost professionalism. I also want to acknowledge and thank WGA's 40th anniversary partners, specifically Western Governors University, Comcast, and National Association of Home Builders. Your generous support made today's celebration possible, and we're so grateful for your incredible partnership here with WGA. We're also inviting people from across the country to watch and listen to our first panel today with current and former Western governors, thanks to the work of some very committed people and dedicated partners, including Bob Mitchell and Linda Mathis with the Bipartisan Leadership Project. BLP provides leadership development to equip leaders with the skills necessary to lead in today's polarized environment. We met Bob and Linda this past February in Washington, D.C., and they were delighted to learn about WGA's long history of bipartisan collaboration on issues of importance to the region, and they introduced us to PBS Books. Together, these two proud organizations believe that when elected officials show they can disagree, and still work collaboratively to solve community issues, then citizens will be more inspired to overcome their own divisions in their own worlds. Talk about a match made in heaven for WGA, given the fiercely bipartisan mission. With BLP and the PBS Books production team are here with us, and our sincere thank you to Western Governors University for making it all possible. Today's stream will be shared with PBS stations, libraries, museums, and trusted community organizations across the country. So Bob, Linda, Georgianne, Sarah, Alan, Rich, Jack, and the entire Friday Zoom crew, thank you for your partnership these past few months. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with each and every one of you, and thank you for making today a reality. And finally, on this special occasion, we are very delighted to be joined by a very special guest who will be joining our governors on stage momentarily. And in some ways, Judy Woodruff needs no introduction, but I'm going to provide one anyway. She has covered politics for other news organizations for 5 decades, including at NBC, CNN, and finally at PBS. A proud graduate of Duke University, Judy joined PBS in 1983, where she was the chief Washington correspondent for the McNeil-Laird NewsHour. She spent a dozen years at CNN, where she served as senior correspondent and anchor of the weekday program Inside Politics. She returned to NewsHour in 2007 and 2013, where she and Gwen Ifill were named the first 2 women co-anchor on national broadcast, until Gwen sadly lost her battle with cancer in 2016. Along the way, Judy has won numerous awards, including a number from our Western states, which I have no doubt are her favorite, because West, after all, is the best. So Judy stepped away from her role as sole anchor of the NewsHour and managing editor about 18 months ago to launch a new project. Now, as senior correspondent, Judy leads America at a Crossroads. This series tackles this time's heightened partisanship, declining, see, I can't even say partisanship because we're so bipartisan here, declining trust in institutions and increased political violence and rapid social change. She has traveled the nation, explored forces driving Americans apart. She has talked to people from all walks of life and political viewpoints, and has engaged academics and civic leaders to try to figure out how to reconnect Americans across the partisan divide. And there's no doubt that she loves the work. Today, she wants to learn from us, and we'll be asking what's working, what can be done to build stronger communities in our states and across the country. Judy, we are absolutely honored and humbled that you're here with us today to help the governors tell the WGA story. So with that, please join me in welcoming the one and only Judy Woodruff.
Thank you, Jack. Tahoe. So this is a treat. The next time I'm going to stay longer than 18 hours to truly soak in the outdoors and the beauty and just the magnificent scenery. And I just want to also congratulate the Western Governors Association for what I have come to learn is a record of 40 years of tackling some of the toughest challenges facing not just your part of the country, but facing the United States of America. So congratulations on your 40 years as an organization. It is great to be, yes? It is great to be here. I do love my hometown of Washington, D.C., but it is good to be reminded of what a big, beautiful country this is. I will tell you, and besides, not much is going on in the news these days, so it was easy to sneak away to come out here. I accepted the invitation to join you because I wanted to see and hear firsthand what I was learning about how bipartisanship is playing out and has played out among Western governors at a time when Washington and so much of the rest of the country is struggling to find common ground. I've been so struck by the division, in fact, that as you just heard Jack describe, when I knew that I was preparing to step away from the anchor desk at the NewsHour after 11 years and to take on something else, it hit me almost instantly, and that is, how could this country that I've covered for over 50 years as a reporter be as divided as it is today, and arguably more divided than at any time that I've been covering American politics. I was driven to want to get out in the country, talk to ordinary Americans, get around to those places that frankly we don't get to hear from, and people we don't get to hear from in the national news often enough. So I set out on this 2-year reporting project. As Jack mentioned, we're calling it America at a Crossroads, to try to understand this divide, to talk to ordinary Americans, to understand what's behind it, to try to understand whether people are comfortable with it. Do they like the fact that we are at each, some of us, not all of us, but some of us are at each other's throats, and whether they see a way through it or not, and if so, how. So the perception, frankly, that this is such a divided time was borne out early last year in one of our earliest reports, and by the way, our pieces are airing every other Wednesday night on the NewsHour. They're available online and on our YouTube playlist at any time, which I'm happy to share with you. But it was borne out when we sat down with the public opinion experts at the respected Pew Research Center in Washington. They told us that if Americans were this far apart on key issues back in, say, 1993, 94, the early 90s, issues like government spending, immigration, abortion, the environment, that we are now this far apart. And they showed us charts based on dozens and dozens of questions they were asking Americans. That's the first thing they showed us. And what was even more striking to me was Pew's research that showed how much darker people's opinions are of people in the other party and how that has changed, and frankly, in a much shorter period of time. Just 8 years ago, in 2016, 45% of Republicans told the Pew researchers they thought that most Democrats were immoral. Now, today, that figure has shot up to 72%. There was not quite as pronounced an increase when Democrats were asked that question about Republicans, but nevertheless, there was an increase. And the same thing when other terms were used, dishonest, lazy, and so on down the list. From the time we started our reporting in early 2023, we have produced, as I mentioned, I think over every other Wednesday, a total of something like 34, 35 reports. We've been to 23, I think, now states. We have visited communities in Oklahoma and rural Pennsylvania, where formerly sleepy K-12 public school boards are now fighting over what books should be on the shelves of those schools, what books should be banned, and what history should be taught in school districts. In my hometown of Tulsa, where I was born, I sat down with a young Republican mayor, G.T. Bynum, who is trying to have the city acknowledge its violent, racist past over 100 years ago, the massacre of hundreds of black residents in 1921, history that was buried for decades and decades, while contending, at the same time he's doing this, he's contending with parent groups in Tulsa who are saying they don't want their children to learn any part of American history that makes them feel uncomfortable. We reported from Arizona on voters in the Latino community who have profoundly different views on politics, despite their shared culture, their shared heritage, their shared faith in so many instances. In Texas and Mississippi and Virginia, we looked at the collapse of local journalism in America and how the fact that more than 2,500 local newspapers have closed down in the past decade in this country, and tens of thousands of reporters, news reporters, have been laid off. It's not only harming people's ability to know what's going on in their communities and tearing away, literally, at the civic fabric that holds these communities together, it's also weakening democracy. In the small town of Canadian Texas, in the Panhandle, we interviewed conservative Republicans, including, never forget him, a rancher named Steve Rader, who had tears in his eyes as he spoke to me about, he said, even though Lori Brown, the local newspaper editor, would occasionally write editorials that he didn't agree with, he said it was her newspaper that week after week told the story of that community, births, marriages, deaths, stop signs that needed to be, or stoplights that needed to be moved or in place. The stories about the need for a nursing home, the stories of people's lives, so that people in the community knew each other. He told me, he said, it's the story of my family. I could read about my children and my grandchildren's football games, baseball games. It kept us together as a community. In Florida, we visited an alternative, they call themselves an alternative health clinic. They call themselves the American, now I won't remember the name of it, We the People healthcare clinic, founded by people who rejected the vaccines for COVID-19 19. Now they say they distrust much of traditional medicine based on widely accepted scientific research, and they are inviting in people in the community, this is in the Sarasota area, who share their distrust. In Tennessee, we interviewed people across the ideological spectrum on guns, on gun rights, from Second Amendment absolutists, as they describe themselves, to Memphis residents who say they have known too many young people who were shot to death. With the help of an outside group called Starts With Us, 11 Tennesseans came together to hammer out a set of 5 relatively mild recommendations with regard to reducing gun violence. The most controversial of that was a recommendation that if someone poses a threat, that there be an ability to remove a gun from their possession. All the other recommendations had to do with education and security. This all was done in the aftermath of a school shooting in Nashville last year that left 6 people dead, including 3 children who were 9 years old. But this group, which spent 3 days together hammering out these results, and they included the owner of a gun range, they were not able to persuade members of the Tennessee state legislature, the most conservative members of the state legislature, to show up even at a briefing they offered, much less to move legislation to consider what they were proposing. They talked to us about how they feared the gentlemen who were what they call themselves absolutist when it comes to the Second Amendment, how they were concerned that they would then be shunned in the gun rights community. In rural eastern Oregon, east of the Cascades, we met with residents who say the city of Portland doesn't represent them in any way. It doesn't represent their values, nor does the state capital in Salem. And they want to secede and they want to join Idaho next door, where they say their priorities will be respected. Still a long way from approval from the state legislature. Some people say it'll never happen. But right now, I believe it's 13 counties in Oregon have voted to join, at least to explore this, join the so-called Greater Idaho movement. All of you who are from Idaho and Oregon can fill me in on this. And of course, we see, if we look to Washington, the dysfunction virtually every day coming from the nation's capital, what we hear on the campaign trail in this presidential election year. We find that the polarization in Washington is spreading. There was a time I remember about 10 years ago when I would say, well, Washington's getting more partisan, but you go out in the country and people and state legislatures, county commissions, school boards, they're not feeling it. The fact is today, in many parts of the country, we are seeing it, and we are feeling it in state capitals, in county commission, and as I said, in school board meetings. I just want to, so it's an uphill climb. I want to share with you right now just a few minute clip of one of the pieces we did. It aired about a month and a half ago. We went to North Carolina to visit Alamance County. It sits between the Raleigh-Durham area and the Greensboro, the very vibrant, growing Greensboro area. Both of these areas are places where jobs are soaring, companies are moving in, they're hiring people, and Alamance County has borne the brunt of this. Many people have moved there all of a sudden. They've tried to find homes. You now see more distribution centers, so there are more jobs theoretically, but the tax base is not kept up with the school system, struggling to keep up with this influx of children. And there, at the same time, there's been an influx of immigrants who are working for many of these new employers, but are finding themselves not always welcome in the community. But here, this is a place where a group, a so-called bridging group, has come in. It's the Richard Harwood Institute. They've come in to try to help the community find some middle ground. And here is just a 4-minute, I think it's about 4-minute excerpt from that, and I believe it's on the screen.
Issues such as inequality, gender identity, and education have become the subjects of national debate, with the focus often on what elected leaders in Washington say and do about them. Yet many of those same issues play out on the local level in communities with their own particular histories and challenges. Judy Woodruff recently traveled to one such community in North Carolina as part of her ongoing series, America at a Crossroads.
The history in Alamance County is not so pleasant.
Inside this room in Burlington, North Carolina, residents of Alamance County have come together to talk through a very difficult subject, their divisions.
We have some gargantuan problems, especially with our school system.
I don't care what side of the spectrum you're on. We're in a tough situation right now.
They're being led by Rich Harwood, who through his nonprofit, the Harwood Institute, has spent decades trying to help communities like this one come together during increasingly divided times.
We have separated from one another more and more in our country. And so that has led to a coarsening of our politics and of our public discourse. It's a fight or flight mode, which says, I am so frustrated with things. I am so afraid of one another. I am so anxious and fearful that I'm going to throw up my hands in disgust and frustration and fear of one another and retreat, or I'm going to come out swinging and try to win at all costs.
And how does this community or in Alamance County play into what you just described?
Look, I have great affection for this community. I've been working here now for a couple of years. But we have to tell the truth about what's happening. And the truth is that this is one of the most divided places in America that I've worked.
I'm here to see her. What's her name?
One key division here is over growth. Out in rural Alamance, it's the busy time of year for Vaughn Willoughby.
Is that everything you need?
That's what I need.
All right.
He runs Pritchett Farms Nurseries, situated in the middle of a cow pasture. And when everything is blooming, his business is booming.
This is our prime time. So we make all our money from about the 1st of March till about Mother's Day.
Yet that same boom also worries Willoughby. Since 2010, Alamance County has grown twice as fast as the country as a whole, thanks in part to its highways, nearby colleges, open land, and relatively low cost of living. But that's turning more of the farmland that he and many others love into commercial distribution centers, housing developments, and public roads.
Like that kind of growth, the people who live in that community that have always lived there, that grew up there, they don't like it because they've lost their neighborhood, they've lost their way of life, they've lost everything that was once resembled, what Alamance County was.
For him, the growth, the influx of newcomers, is forcing difficult questions about zoning, taxation, and the future.
And therein lies, in my opinion, the pressure that we feel, from the agricultural community that I work with and represent through Farm Bureau, that I think the biggest thing is, where do all these people live? Or where are they going to live? Or what are you going to do with them? Where are they going to go to school?
Over in East Burlington, about 20 minutes away, that pressure's being felt acutely.
6 days before the start of this new school year, there are yet more mold issues in the Alamance-Burlington school system.
Last fall, amid ongoing funding shortfalls, the Alamance-Burlington school system suffered a major outbreak of mold, the results of years of neglect. It led to a 2-week delay to the start of the school year.
What it told me is something that I felt like a lot of us knew. We knew that the upkeep of our schools was lacking.
That's just a short clip from, I'd say it's about a fourth of that piece. But I wanted just to give you a taste, a sense of the kind of reporting we've been able to do, traveling around the country, talking to folks, and to say what a humbling experience this has been. To go and to hear people speak from the heart to us, telling us why they think the challenges today are as difficult as they are, and why they believe so strongly as they do. And it's not always easy to see how we come together, but we think at the NewsHour it's important enough. I think all of us who care about this country should think it's important enough to be looking at this, looking clear-eyed at it, and trying to understand it so that we can even begin to have a hope for how we will essentially come together. But none of us should be under any illusion. It's not going to be over on November 6th, the day after the election this year. As contentious as that's going to be, I think we are still going to be a divided country. And the question is, how do we begin to work our way through that. So I'm going to stop with that. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with your governors, and perhaps we can talk about some of these tough questions around division. But thank you so much. I'm incredibly honored to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And I wanted to invite our governors to come on up to the stage.
Absolutely. Good to see you. How are you? Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. It is great to be here with all of these governors.
And Judy, I was going to introduce them real fast.
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're
Sorry,
good. You're
ahead.
good. Sorry.
I'm out of order. Go
No,
ahead.
you're good. So she got in late last night. So I wanted to take a quick moment before Judy and the governors get going in their discussion to just acknowledge our participating Western governors who've graciously taken the time to be with us for today's celebration. Each governor here today has served as WGA chair during their time as a member governor, which is not only a testament to their leadership, but their support for WGA's mission to advance Western priorities through bipartisan collaboration. And starting us off is WGA's presiding chair representing our current Western governors and proudly serving the Western state, Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. Up next, our current chair of Western Governors Foundation, also serving as WGA chair back in 2019 from the Aloha State, former Hawaii Governor David Ige. And next, from the Silver State, WGA chair back in 2015, former Governor of Nevada, Brian Sandoval. Next, hailing from the Treasure State, chair of WGA back in 2017, former Montana Governor Steve Bullock. And hailing from the Beehive State, chair of WGA back in 2013, former Utah Governor Gary Herbert. And from the Gem State, a true gem, by the way, WGA chair is back in 2011, former Governor of Idaho, Butch Otter. And also joining us from the great state of Wyoming, serving as chair of WGA back in 2016, former Governor Matt Mead. And rounding out our impressive lineup, also from the Gem State, is serving as chair of WGA 30 years ago this year, back in 1994, former Nevada Governor Bob Miller. Judy, all yours.
Thank you, thank you. Now that I've figured out where I am in the program and where we are, thank you. It's such an honor to sit with all of you, and I do want to pick up with this conversation about bipartisanship, because seems to me it's one of the things that the Western Governors Association has held up as something you believe in over the time you've been in existence. I want to start with you, Governor Gordon. I mean, why do you think it is more possible for public officials to work together in the way the governors have than it is in Washington? What's the difference?
Well, my own particular point of view, and it's wonderful to have you here, Judy, and thank you so much, and nice to have all of you here as well. My own view is that at a state level, and I think particularly in the West, you have to deal with real issues. You can't deal with phantom issues or things that are spun up. There's some of that, it's true. But we have neighbors. Before COVID, my good friend Steve Bullock and I were on the call almost regularly trying to figure out what to do about opening Yellowstone Park. It was a problem we had to deal with, and we had our respective perspectives on what the science was, or whether we should have masks or not masks, all of that. But to have somebody that you could reach out to that was a neighbor, that was dealing with the same issues on the ground, that's what made the difference. And I think that's why this group of bipartisan governors, and I've worked with many of them, really have a terrific perspective on how to get things done, how to move the country forward.
Governor Meade, I want to come to you, way over at the other end of the group, with the same question. What's different?
Well, I think that I agree with Governor Gordon's comments, but I think it's even deeper than that in this sense. That I think it's because the West, we have so many shared issues: wildlife, water, endangered species, energy. As I have worked with governors, both Democrat and Republican, oftentimes the differences are not as great as you would expect. Governor Bullock and I tried to figure out some solutions for coal and work together on endangered species, for example, all of which was beneficial not just to address the issue between our states, but when Governor Bullock and I, Republican and Democrat, can go back to Washington, D.C. and say, we agree on these 5 points, or we agree on these 10 points. That, I think, is an extremely powerful message. The other thing I would say is that the design of Western governors, the association, and the foundation, we spend time together as friends. We break bread together, as is said. And you get to know, hey, this Democrat or this Republican over there, they have the shared care for their family, for their community. We may disagree on certain policies, but they're not they are us, they are me. They share the same concerns about family, community, state, and country. And being able to work together with varied ideas leads to a better result. And I think that has been foundational for the Western Governors Association.
Governor Sandoval, as you look at sort of where the country is right now, and you apply what you've learned, what you were able to do as governor of Nevada, are there things that you think could be happening, could be done right now that aren't being done at the national level? I heard some of you speak this morning about leadership, qualities of leadership. What are we seeing or not seeing right now modeled at the national level?
I'd like to see more gatherings like this. And, you know, for us, when I was first elected in 2011, I didn't know what to expect. And when I first started participating in the Western Governors Association, I got to know these folks and learn from them and work together, as Governor Meade talked about, on these shared issues. You know, we talked professionally, and then we got to know one another. And we work together, and our states do share a lot of different issues. You know, one person who isn't here is Jerry Brown, who's governor of California while I was governor of Nevada. We worked together on multiple issues on Lake Tahoe. And we would hold a summit here, and we would bring our federal delegations, and we would have conversations, and we would reach shared solutions, although, you know, we had some disagreements on other policy issues. So what I'd like to see is more gatherings like this, more opportunities for the delegates that are in front of us. You know, I'm here with Governor Miller, you know, former governor, and I was in the legislature when he was the governor, and he was a mentor to me and somebody that I admired and respected. And you try to model yourself after someone like that, and that's what I'm hoping for these delegates. You've listened to these people with so much wisdom and so much experience that you'll listen and really take that to heart and model yourself. And as they, you know, go on to take on leadership positions, they too will take the responsibility of setting an example.
Governor Ige, Hawaii, we look upon it as a somewhat different place. You're out in the middle of the Pacific. You're still one of the 50 states. You've had to experience your own challenges around dealing with the other party, even though I know Hawaii is principally a Democratic state. How do you look on all this from your many years of experience in government?
Well, I do think, you know, Hawaii is unique in the sense that there is no majority in Hawaii. We are all minorities. And all of us learned a long time ago that you can't get anything done unless you work with people. And so, I mean, I do think that that's a fundamental belief that all of us have, that we're committed to making our communities better, and we're committed to collaborating and working through issues. And one thing about the Western Governors Association, you know, all of us are elected by our states. And I think that I've always experienced the highest level of respect from my colleagues. You know, Governor Gordon and I might not agree on every single issue, but he is the governor of Wyoming. And that's very important for me to acknowledge that and recognize that. And so when we talk about different issues, I'm respectful that each and every one of us have a responsibility to our constituents. They don't accept that I couldn't get it done because we're in gridlock. And all of us as governors have to live through that. And so there is a commitment to working together. And my experience has been in many, many issues across the West, there is always more that we can agree on. There is more common ground. And if you start looking for a common place to start conversations, it makes the conversations a lot easier.
Governor Otter, Idaho, how do you, when you hear your fellow governors talking about this, what comes to mind? What are some examples of how you, in your own experience, were able to work across the aisle, were able to work with governors who weren't in your political party?
Well, you know, starting with I came out of Congress to become governor. And I left Congress, well, because I was tired of it after 6 years. And all the complaining and not getting along and fighting with people. And being raised in Idaho, and I lived 10 miles from where I was born 82 years ago, why, you got along with it. Plus, coming from a family of 11, you had to get along with people. You had to solve problems. And so when I came to the Western governors as a newly elected governor, the first thing I found was an organization that said, hey, we're going to be better than our excuses. We're going to be stronger than those things that hold us back. And we're going to work on them. And so whether it was endangered species, we all recognized that water to land is like blood is to the body. Without either one, you don't have life. And so we had all those things, as Matt said, we had all those things in common. And so when we recognized the importance of solving that issue, whatever differences we may have had were kind of melted away. And so we ran out of excuses of not doing the right thing.
Governor Miller, you were in office, I think, going back the farthest of anybody here, 1989, am I right? So
89 to 99.
To 89 to 99 for a decade. Did it feel different then?
Absolutely felt different. It wasn't as confrontational. It wasn't as personal, except for campaigns. And it depended on the attitudes that you came in with. For example, the Republican in charge of the messaging for Nevada when I was governor, Bill Raggio, recently before he passed away, had said, compromise is not a dirty word. And that was true of our attitudes. Governor Sandoval, by the way, was one of my appointees for the Gaming Commission, the most powerful commission. My re-election campaign, a wealthy Californian who had moved to Lake Tahoe was the opponent. As a result, most of the Republicans weren't warming to him. And so several prominent Republicans endorsed me. The result was the newspaper wrote, Miller ruins two-party system. But it wasn't as bad, and it wasn't, social media wasn't as slanted or as immediate. In the mid-90s, it started changing, I think, and that made it more difficult.
And I'm delighted to hear the efforts here because it's almost as if you're in a vacuum. You are the leaders of our future. I'm delighted to see all you young ladies and gentlemen and that you're willing to stand up and reach over whatever differences you might have. There's all too few students and they're doing that even now. You are the hope for the future.
Governor Herbert, Utah, and then well, let me just ask it this way. As you think about where we are, it's 2024. We are in a presidential election year. Do you see signs of glimmers of positive, of hope out there that you think can be a way, a lesson to bring us together down the road, if not this year, then in the years to come?
Well, yes, I'm hopeful. I think we all, as we sit here talking, I'm struck by the fact that we're saying, isn't this unusual that governors in a bipartisan way are working together? Like, how strange is that? It used to be the norm, as Governor Miller's talked about. Things have changed for a variety of reasons, I think. It's almost like a life and death struggle in Washington, D.C. anymore. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? It's an us versus them mentality. Them is the enemy. They must be defeated. And the end justifies the means. So, again, we just saw the Speaker of the House was thrown out of his position as Speaker because he had the temerity to use Democrats to get votes to keep the government open and functioning. And the guy that threw him out used 9 Republicans and all the Democrats as a Republican to get him out. I mean, the hypocrisy knows no bounds. I think the governors really are setting an example. I think we need to look more to the states for our problems, solutions. We're much more nimble, we're more efficient, we're effective, we're closer to the people. We look too much to Washington, D.C., which is compounding the problems of people that are remote, they're not in touch, and are playing this king of the hill game. And so you add to that mix cable television, they're advocating as opposed to just reporting the news, and candidates that run for office that pour kerosene on the fire and gives us this kind of divisiveness that's been unheard of in our country's history today. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but I think we need to change how we think. The rising generation's got to step up and say, you know what, that's not good enough for us. We are going to work together in a bipartisan way, look for common ground, look for the win-win, and see if we can't do something better than the past generation has left for us. And if we don't do that, then I think the country has great peril going forward. But I'm hopeful. As I've met with the young people here today, if they're representative of the rising generation, our future's bright. But we need more like them stepping up.
We're putting a lot on your shoulders. So keep working out. Governor Bullock, how do we work our way through this? What do you see?
I guess I see a number of things, one of which is everybody has to find that North Star. And for me, it's WWBOD. What would Butch Otter do? Beyond that, look, being the last governor to speak, I agree with so many things that people said. Governors actually have to get stuff done, right? We can't just talk about issues. Grandstanding is easy. Putting that in check is difficult. We had land-based or resource-based policies that brought us all together. But I think it was also more than that. When most of us were serving together, WGA had this bumper sticker that said, bipartisanship happens. Bipartisanship doesn't just happen. It takes work. And it actually takes more work than going to our respective sides. And in part, it was the trust that we all forged together. Now, how do we do that then going forward is your exact question. And look, I'm not going to be Pollyanna-ish. This is a 250-year experiment that is being deeply, deeply challenged right now. This 250-year experiment called representative democracy, I do think is being tested in ways that, look, it's happened a couple other times, through civil rights, through the Civil War. I have to have the optimism that we'll get through it. I think in part, though, it was 2016, I said, I wish people cared more about politics and government. And like, boy, any given Sunday, 1.5 million people turn in, watch professional sports. Why don't we care about it like that? I think we do now, though, right? You're a Seahawks fan? Not only do I hate you, I hate your mother. Like, money has polarized this. The media has polarized this. The incentives aren't actually to work together. Yet, when you talk to people, you talked about your pew, polling also says, what do people actually want? People want to see leaders work together to get stuff done. Unfortunately, right now, I think Washington's become a place where talking about doing something is a substitute for doing it. Message bills, or look at that great tweet I had, what a difference it made. It doesn't make any difference. If we can go back to where the base is and recognize that it takes courageous leaders on both sides to say something's bigger than the zero-sum game of the food fight, and it's actually getting things done. If we can emulate that in some respects, maybe that's one of the ways we'll get back there.
Anybody else want to weigh in on what do we need to do to get through this? Governor, anybody? Governor Gordon, I want to come back to you. I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about. As I think about the Western states, I think about the many issues around natural resources, water, climate, wildfires, and the list goes on, where the West is dealing with the federal government, and it's often been an antagonistic relationship, not always, but it's been tough. How do you see that going forward, and how do you work through Democratic administration or Republican administration in Washington? How much difference does it make, and how do you work through that?
Well, I think it makes a bit of a difference, but let me start. NEPA and Clean Air Act, those were all Republican efforts initially. They were well-designed, and over time, they've kind of grown more and more complicated as legal challenges have come. Now, often, environmental impact statements are shot down because a form wasn't filled correctly. It really has less to do with what's happening on the ground. If you look at the largest wind farm in the nation, which is the second largest in the world, it actually predates both Matt Mead and me when it got started, 2006. 12 years, we finally got the impact statement finally finished. This morning, we broke ground on the newest advanced nuclear power plant. It has not one, not two, not three, not four, but 7 environmental impact statements that it's going to have to do. This is something that the Biden administration also recognized, but they want to change and I'm not trying to be partisan about this, it's just everybody's got their own game plan on this. So what we want to do is enable a quicker path for the things that we want to do and make it more difficult for the other things, depending on your perspective. And that kind of zero-sum game isn't going to work. We're going to have to come together. States really can lead the effort. Governor Mead followed a Democrat, Governor Friedenthal, and we led the way on sage grouse, an endangered species. We're still dealing with it, but Wyoming has the best populations, the best habitat. And so you go through, I think that probably started really before, probably in the Clinton administration, went through the Bush administration, certainly through the Obama administration, on into the Trump, and now currently in this administration. You can't afford to be partisan about this. You've got to drill down to the issue, move it forward, and work with your colleagues. We're working on that one right now with delisting the grizzly bear, something that I know many of the colleagues here worked on with endangered species. Governor Ige's invasive species issue. These are not partisan issues. These are real issues. Governor Bullock was talking about it. Everyone else was. You know, we have to get the job done. We have to meet the needs of our people.
And to any one of you, I was Governor Otter. I mean, how do you? How does the governor? Let's bring the WGA specifically into this. How does this association help you in your working with Washington? Again, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, how does the WGA help or make a difference?
Well, Judy, having been in Washington, D.C., and what goes on there, which is very frustrating. And it's frustrating not only because it seems like there's no will to solve the problem. There's still a will to perpetuate one's own position rather than for the good of the nation. So I say again, when I became governor and found the Western Governors Association, or joined, I found a place that I was happy. It was the Garden of Political Decision for me, Garden of Eden, where people actually got along. I stayed away from the tree, but they actually wanted to work to get along. And I've seen situations, especially with Matt and with Steve, where when we were working on endangered species, and especially the sage grouse, I'm sorry I brought that up, the sage grouse, where we were working on a plan and we had to count the leks. There had to be so many leks. Or wolves, that was another one. Anyway, my point is that I heard back from them and they said, well, if we can help by increasing that or decreasing that, we'd be more than happy to do it. That then became the Western Governor's plan. And it worked. And it was marvelous. And it was, like I say again, it was the place I could go to surrender to get a good idea.
So did they speak when they said likes instead of likes? Because we still count likes on Facebook. Never, I'm sorry, bad joke.
What's Facebook?
Judy, I would want to add to what Butch said. You know, one of the amazing things about Western Governors Association is because we can work together in a bipartisan fashion, we can go to Washington together as well. And so when Western Governors goes back to Washington, D.C., we get an audience with cabinet members. And I think it's very powerful if 7, 8 governors, Republicans, Democrats, are sitting across the table from a cabinet secretary and saying, we have this common issue, whether it's energy or water, wildlife, and here's what we think should be taking place. That is unique for Western Governors Association. Compared to any other Governors Association, that is unique for Western Governors Association to have that ability to do that. And to be able to do it sitting next to Republicans and Democrats, independents, had an independent as well. I think it's an extremely powerful message. And I also would say, you know, too often we talk about Republicans and Democrats fighting each other. In the West, oftentimes it's the states versus the federal government. That often is the battle. And when you can show up.
Is that equally true, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican?
I think it is. I think it is true. We wouldn't necessarily agree on the solution, but sage grouse in the West, with the exception of Hawaii, you know, it's a problem. Endangered species, particularly with Hawaii, is an issue that needs to be addressed. It's an important issue for Western states. So the ability to say it's not a R versus D. It is, in the West, these issues are important to us. We're showing up as a group to say this is an issue that needs to be resolved. We get an audience, and we get we get results as well. I mean, I worked, with the Obama administration on the Endangered Species Act, and the Secretaries of Interior were very responsive, all the Western governors, and very courteous as well. But the battle wasn't between R&D, it was between states who have to take the lead on this versus the federal government. And so I think that's very unique with Western Governors Association.
And I guess I'd add a couple of different things on that, one of which is that Western Governors Association puts together policy resolutions, right? And we have very different views of the world, even on this stage. But they can go through 10, 12 iterations. And it's not that it's watered down to nothing. It's what's the core that we actually want to get done when it comes to working with the federal government. I was also always so pleased with my colleagues because, look, as a governor, it's a heck of a lot easier to rail against the federal government than it is to say, all right, even if I disagree with that person, either the cabinet secretary or the president, how am I going to work constructively to advance my interests, my state's interests? And what I think we saw time and time again with the Western governors and the Western Governors Association was it might be easier to grandstand, but that's not going to get a thing done. It might make you more popular to just rail against the federal government, but find the times where you can constructively work to either move the federal government or move them and persuade them in the areas that will benefit your citizens, whether your citizens live in Wyoming, Nevada, Idaho, anywhere. Because if we can find those things that we agree on and move it forward, well, then the rest of it, yeah, we can fight those later. But that unified front of all these governors showing up, I think was meaningful.
Yeah, Judy, one thing I would just like to add too, the administration, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat, they want to be successful as well. So when the governors, Democrats and Republicans can find common ground and find solutions that work, they are more than happy to work with us to make it happen because it's their success. Our success as governors reflect well, regardless of whether the administration is Democrat or Republican. As Steve had said, there are core policy differences, but on the working level, when we're working on invasive species or other issues that affect our communities, they want to be helpful as well. And so, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican executive, at the federal level, when governors can find common ground and a solution, they are often willing to step forward and work with us to get something done because it helps them be successful as well.
Governor Miller, how do you see this dynamic between the state, the Western governors, what you represent, your issues, and the federal government?
Well, I think that one of the things to observe is that Western governors as a whole are more civil with each other, and they're more moderate. I think for this to progress to a sensible solution, all individuals in positions of responsibilities have to become more moderate. About 10 years ago, the political pundit in Nevada wrote a column about myself and my successor, Republican Governor Kenny Gwinn. Kenny Gwinn had been chairman of Republicans for Miller at one point in time. I do have some others that are opposed to me, by the way. But he pointed out that both of us finished our terms with fairly high numbers, but neither of us would likely get elected because we would lose our primary. So moving to the middle is critical. And as I mentioned, Senator Raggio, my friendly adversary, when he and I went into each legislative session, we knew we were going to come to a resolution. We weren't going to go on forever. It was which 40-yard line we were going to be on. We both knew we were going to have to give on something. So what were your priorities? And I think that's what we lack now, but we also lack civility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to work with somebody that's castigating you publicly. Some of that has to be curtailed. And it's also true, unfortunately, that most people generally have formulated an opinion, one side or the other, and they only listen to things or read things that reinforces their already opinion. Somehow the media has to help as well to bring things to the middle.
Media has a role to play, for sure.
Yeah, as a whole.
Governor Herbert, what about any comment on what he just said, but also on the federal?
Well, I just would add to the comments already made that under our Constitution, our form of government, states are the laboratories of democracy, little pilot programs, finding ways to solve problems. And as a governor of Utah, if I find a better way to do it by watching what happens in northern Utah or Idaho, or Wyoming or Montana, I will want to copy that. And we'll learn from each other. So we work together to find better ways to go home to our own domain and solve the people's problems and have good policy. That's part of the system. That works good. Until a governor decides to run for president. Then all of a sudden we got the us and them and they're the enemy, and that's just part of politics. Some of that's because we the people, we excuse bad behavior, and then we're surprised we get more of it. We not only excuse it and tolerate it, we sometimes encourage it. We go and cheer when somebody's acting obnoxiously or rudely or disrespecting their opponent, as opposed to the loyal opposition. And I think it stems from the fact that we're asking the federal government to do too much. They've never designed to do all that they're doing now. We have a $34.5 trillion debt. Why do we tolerate that? Both sides of the aisle know that we've got to do something about balancing the budget, or at least trying. Entitlement reform, we kick that can down the road. We have people, if we take a questionnaire of all of Congress, do you believe you should have respect for your colleagues across the aisle? Absolutely. Would you run good, clean campaigns? Absolutely. And yet, we see negative campaigning all the time. Why? Because it works. That's a problem, not with the elected official as much, the problem with we the people. Why do we excuse it? Why do we tolerate it? Why do we encourage it? Again, governors, it's not as hard because we work together, learning from each other as these little laboratories of democracy, finding what works best for my state by learning what works good or doesn't work as good in another state and making modifications in our own state to do it better. The system is conducive for us to get along. We the people have got to stop the federal government from doing things wrong and creating the divisiveness that we see today.
Governor Sandoval, I want to bring in the question of education. You're now the president of University of Nevada, Reno. You're smack in the middle of it. And increasingly, we see governors having to weigh in on education issues. They've always had a role around education. How do you see that right now? And how do you see a different approach in the West from the rest of the country? What do you see going on right now?
I think I do see a difference in the West, and just listening to my colleagues here, we all have a shared sensibility, and I think that's why we connect so much. We have large rural areas, a lot of open spaces, people who come from a lot of different backgrounds. I can only speak for my state, and there are two large universities. There's one in Reno, one in Las Vegas. The governor hasn't really needed to get involved in some of the issues that are facing the globe and on our campuses now. I know I can speak for myself as my lessons that I learned from all these individuals and the people in this room in terms of taking problems head on and having conversations in my situation directly with students, and to be listening to them to make sure that they're being seen and that they're being heard. And that has made a massive difference on my campus. And again, it comes from all these individuals here and me getting the opportunity to spend 8 years with them Jim Ogsbury's out there, and you'll hear from him. I thought he did a marvelous job of bringing us together and vetting issues and setting things up for when we went to Washington, D.C., but also making sure that those cabinet secretaries came to our states. And after we had these meetings, if I had an individual issue, I could pick up the phone and have a conversation, and that cabinet secretary would take my call. And so, again, I can't speak for what's happening in other states back to the education issue, but I think it's important on our campus, and I think all campuses, that they're laboratories of democracy.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that the students have an opportunity to express themselves. Obviously there's a difference between civil discourse and civil disobedience, and that's something they have to, free speech. Those are all things that you need to monitor.
Governor Otter and Governor Gordon, I want to bring you in on this too, because in a number of states we're seeing laws passed that to affect what can be taught in schools and how it can be taught. Various other pieces of legislation, ideas that really weren't an issue up until the last 5, 7, or 8 years. And so I'm wondering, as you think about education as an issue, and I'm inviting either one of you to speak about this, whether there's something about the approach you've learned as Western governors that informs how you think about this, or is it something that you think is just the rest of the country and let the South worry about it, or wherever they're struggling with it? I mean, Oklahoma, for example, is.
Let's go alphabetically.
Yeah.
Wyoming will go first.
Ouch. Well, I can tell you in Wyoming we have all that discussion going on as well. And it's been a complicated one. So let me just change the channel briefly. I'll come back because I think it's often obnoxious when we don't answer the question you ask. But it seems to me one of the biggest things you've heard up here is what politics can do, which is about solving problems. And I say this all the time. This is the most exciting time, I think, in our history. There's more opportunities, more challenges, more ways that we can address those. And politics really is a way to find the key to open those solutions. Unfortunately, right now, it feels to me that politics has become much more about look at me, or let me see if I can slam the door on the other side. To answer your question specifically, when we started seeing this, we said, well, what's going on in our K-12 education system? Why is it that we have seniors that are just sort of sitting in the classroom when they have passions and they have interests and they want to engage with that? Can we look top to bottom in our education system, rethink it, and really understand more how we can make education that much more relevant for students so that we can get them engaged at an earlier level, maybe lead them to university, lead them to trade school, lead them into a job, knowing that whatever they start out with, they'll probably come back to the education system. So we also looked at our post-secondary and said, how do we make it more attainable, more relevant, and more accessible? And we're in the process of doing that now. And when you have parents engaged, students engaged, community engaged, industry engaged, suddenly a lot of those other issues, which were all about what are we teaching in the old style, start to fade away. And lastly, I would say, when we looked, and I know Governor Meade went through the same things, when we looked, it took 23 years to teach all the standards that Wyoming was requiring of its students K-12, 23 years. Just ridiculous. So when you start to make that slimmer, more elegant, and meet the needs of students, then you have community engagement. Then you start listening to what are people's concerns, not what's generated in Florida or Texas or Massachusetts or wherever else, but what's relevant to our students and how do we enable them to be successful in their lives. So that's how we've engaged on it.
I think the education system expresses the same thing that it sees in Washington, D.C. the same thing that it sees in all controversial issues. And, you know, it's unfortunate because education is one of the most important things that government does. You know, it's like our founders said, that a well-educated citizenry is our first line of defense over any form of tyranny. If you can't enslave the mind, you can't enslave the body. And I've spent a lot of time as governor working on my education system, but trying to leave as much liberty to the local units, to try to leave as much freedom for them to build their own community character. Because Weippe, Idaho is a little bit different than Boise, Idaho. You know, the school district in Weippe is 15, in Boise it's about 240,000. So you have got to allow that local character. If you want to retain that local virtue, you got to retain that local character. And so in my 12 years, I created 2 community colleges. The first year we opened the College of Western Idaho, we had 1,500 students. Today we have 33,000. The pent-up demand for education beyond high school became very apparent. So anyway, 2 community colleges, a medical school, which we never had in the state, and I moved the law school from Steve's district down to Boise, from Moscow to Boise, although they still have a law school. But my point is that I think, by and large, the arguments that go on with the PTA, after school, in the library, and that sort of thing, is a reflection of what we see everywhere else.
Yeah.
And so they think this is the way you're supposed to. Leadership demands mandate. If you haven't got a mandate and you're becoming a leader, you're in trouble. Because you're going to have to make some tough decisions that mandate that you have says you're allowed to do this. And so I don't know the answer. I wish I did. But the answer is not what we're doing now. And somehow you still have to have an education system that provides for the future, that provides for the promise that the founding fathers thought public education should. And at the same time, you have to allow for the local community to establish its standard of practice.
Governor Meade, do you have a thought on what we're talking about here?
I do. I'd like a different question, please.
All the more reason why I want to know what you're thinking.
Well, a couple things. I agree with Butch. You know, education is foundational to our country, our system of government. And when we fail at that, we're, you know, potentially hurting the entire system of our government, of our country. I think maybe this was the point of your question is in the video, and you're beautiful. I thought you did a wonderful job introducing us to the crossroads that we face. The challenge that you see in schools that I think is some of the most controversial is which books do we ban? Which books do we allow to read? Here's where I start out fundamentally. Ignorance, I don't believe, is answer to anything. Hiding our history is not an answer to anything. It has to be age appropriate, of course, but I think when most of us, when we think about education, or I should speak only for myself, I think, what would I want my kids to know when they're going for that first job interview or when they're applying for college? I would want my kids to know about the history of my community and my state and my country, the good and the bad. And I believe in this country, if you teach history fully, a reasonable mind will always say our history as a country, many, many more good things than bad things. But to contrast it with the good, you should teach all. And because to not do so sends, I think, a false sense of what made this country, the struggles this country had. And if we believe history is the harbinger of the future, how do you not teach history in an accurate way? I was struck by the students, or some of the parents saying their students didn't want to feel uncomfortable about some of the history. This country has done some uncomfortable things. I think that's true. But on the scale, we've done many, many more wonderful things. And those things that we as a country have done wrong should be the teachers for us now and in the future, how to not repeat those types of mistakes. That's my view.
We only have a few minutes left. I'd love to hear each one of you as we think about this year and what we're facing as a country. What you want our leaders, whether they're the candidates for president or anyone else who's a leader, the sitting governors in office like you, Governor Gordon, or anyone else, what should they be saying? What should they be modeling right now to ensure that we are going to get through the tough issues that confront us, whether it's in climate related, or whether it's housing related, or healthcare related, or immigration related, whatever it is. What should our leaders, what behaviors, what language, what presentation should our leaders be modeling? And I'd love to hear each one of you on that. You want to start?
Well, thank you. And I think that's a lot of what I've learned from this group of leaders. And I acknowledge you all have a much better title than I do. As former governor, you have more freedom. But the fact of the matter is that I think leadership is a tough place to be. And it is important that we speak the truth. It is important, especially important, that we listen and find how to delve in on the issues and focus critically on, are the solutions truly solutions, or do they themselves also bring on further difficulties? For myself, 74% approval rating. I just got censured by the Republican Party of Wyoming, and I think that tells you a little bit of how different partisan politics have become. I'm the second most popular governor in the state. Phil Scott, or in the country, Phil Scott of Vermont is higher, so it may be about size of population. But leadership is about taking on the tough challenges and walking through them. And I think people respect that. That's the message I would say.
Governor Herbert, what should our leaders be saying? What should they be modeling right now?
Well,
go ahead, Governor Herbert, and then I'll come back to you. Okay. Governor Herbert, yeah.
They should be saying what I say. That's easy for me to agree with and to get along with. And, I think as we think about what they should say, unfortunately, the reality is they're going to say what they think needs to be said to get reelected or elected the first time. Not necessarily what's best for the people, but what's best for them to get elected. I cannot save the world if I don't get elected to office. That's, I think, the sad truth. And again, I sound like Johnny One Note here, but we, the people, have got to hold them to a higher standard. But the question I'll ask everybody here is, does anybody here think that the people running for president, certainly from the two major parties, are the best people we can produce to be running for the nomination of the highest office in the land in this country of 340 million? If we don't think they're the two best, then we need to ask ourselves why. Why are we not getting the best people to run? Why are not the best people running? Why are they not coming to the top? Why are we getting lesser individuals that get the nomination? That's something we've got to grapple with as a country. And the system that we have now maybe is not delivering what it should do. Again, my concern is that people, rather than say, I'll do this to bring us together and work together and solve problems, that they're going to say, you're bad, I'm good, and adds to the divisiveness that we see in the country today. When we see it with the rhetoric that's being done, particularly out of Washington, D.C. I don't see it as with the governors because they have their own domain to go back to. But if you're running for a Washington, D.C. office, you want to be the president, or you want to be in the cabinet, or if you want to be in Congress and the Senate and the House, that tends to be a lot more divisive in us versus them. And again, we've got to have the people of America say, we won't stand for it anymore.
Governor Ige? And,
Yeah, Judy, I do think that it's really not about what the leaders say, because as you know, and as most of us here would say, they're going to say what they're going to say, and we've seen it over the last several months. I am optimistic about this election because it really gets to all of you. It's really about the people, and this democracy is about the people speaking about what kind of leadership or leader they want to vote on. And I really do believe and trust in the wisdom of the voters and the people of our communities. I think as we approach the election, people will get more serious about their vote and about what their vote means. And I'm confident that the people will make the right decision and the right people will get elected, and we will get to the next phase of how can we construct a more perfect union for all of our communities across all the 50 states and territories.
Governor Miller, yeah, absolutely correct about the role of the American people. And what about the
I'm
leaders?
sorry, what did you say? Could you repeat that?
Yes. What should our leaders be saying, doing right now? We just heard Governor Ige refer to the voters.
Unfortunately, I think we're on the precipice of a cyclone in this presidential election, and I hope we're able to overcome it and try and reinstitute some stability and discuss the issues. In less than 2 weeks, there's the first presidential debate. How much of that's going to be civil? How much of it's going to be issue-oriented? I think that people that are moderate, like most of us in this room, I would suspect, need to speak up. We might be in the minority, but you give an alternative to extreme viewpoints is really important. I just hope we need to move the country back to the middle. I remember when President Clinton was elected, he was a benefit of a new organization, Democratic Leadership Council, started by Al Fromm. The purpose of that was to bring the Democratic Party back more toward the middle. I know my own reaction was, I would have had a hard time standing next to George Dukakis, but I could stand next to Bill Clinton. Now, whether you agree or disagree with what he went from beyond that, it was a decision born out of multiple people saying, we need to come to the middle, we need to respect the positions of our adversaries and develop policies that make sense.
Governor Meade.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said. But to me, as we look at this election, I'm not certain that this election, whoever's elected president, it is going to calm us as a country, is going to bring us together. And what I think about is a little more long-term, and that's sort of the foundational things that our country needs to do well. A respect for the rule of law, recognition of the role that the press has to play. The press is not our enemy, and I think all of us recognize the press is not our enemy. Having said that, there's certainly some days where I read some things in the press where I knew they weren't my friend. But the press has an important role to play. The press has a role to play to question, to make sure what is key to our country, that we can all agree that the sun rises in the east, that facts are real, that we cannot lead a country based upon what we want it to look like. Reality matters. And we need together, our leaders need to come together. We can debate what the best policy is to address a situation, but we need a better way to agree what the facts are. We need to have a better way to say, this is honest and this is dishonest. And we always have to have a respect for the rule of law. Because absent that, everything else, every other policy that we may want to debate, it won't make any difference if we don't have a respect for the rule of law.
Governor Sandoval. Yeah.
No, thank you. And I'm with Matt. You know, the die is cast. I mean, it's June and the election is in November. And, you know, I heard Governor Miller, I agree with civility and honesty and respect for the rule of law. You know, everyone in this room has a responsibility. I mean, these are all of you are people that are involved and engaged and are policymakers. So you really do all have a responsibility to go out there and hold people accountable and work with people and find the right solution. And then with regard to the press, you know, we really got to get away from rewarding clicks. That's where I get frustrated, is the sensationalism in order to draw attention to, you know, a certain subject area and to move perhaps a false narrative, but at least a not correct narrative. So I think there's a responsibility with the press, there's a responsibility with the policymakers, there's a responsibility with our young leaders, and now, you know, with our active and elected officials as well.
Governor Bullock.
Yeah, the challenge of what do I want out of our elected officials over the next 5 months, I mean, maybe as Governor Herbert says, who cares what we want? I mean, look, we're in a position right now, 5 months from election, where 170 members of Congress from 37 states deny the results of the 2020 election. We're in a position where a quarter of Americans literally think that the FBI was behind January 6th. So what I want and what I would hope for is, I've been on sides of elections where I was deeply disappointed. You know, we talk about the Constitution as this bedrock, which it is. But as Governor Meade said, as Governor Sandoval suggested, that it's also the norms. It's the recognition that we may win or lose an election, be upset, and we might not like the policy, but that doesn't mean we burn down the representative democracy or that we burn down the press. We respect some of the norms. We respect the rule of law, even when the rule of law doesn't seem with us. So what I would, like, in my ideal world would be, yeah, at the end of the day or 5 months from now, everybody would say, I might be deeply disappointed in the election, but there's something so much more important, and we stand on the shoulders of 250 years experience before us. And whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Vegetarian, whatever it might be, that protecting those norms and protecting the rule of law, so that generation has the opportunity to screw up at times, hopefully do better than us, but maintain that 250-year experiment. And it comes from that baseline of respect for some of the norms that have served us well over this time.
Governor Otter, last.
I suppose I have to clap for that.
First time you've ever clapped anything I've said, Gov.
I've seen a big change in the political spectrum in Idaho, and that's unique. I've been in politics. I've been involved in politics. I've been in political office for 36 years, from the highest level as governor right down to the legislature. But this year, something happened, and I think it's part of the national rhetoric that's starting to scare people. This year, something happened. There was a few of us got together, and we decided that we weren't going to play their game anymore, their way. We were going to play our own game. There's over 860 precincts in Idaho. And what happened a few years back, after I was out of office, why a group of very impatient, I guess I should say, of my party, went out and found a bunch of precinct people that they elected. And the precinct is the genesis of any party's success. And so they elected their own chairman. They then elected their own, some of their own legislators. And then they started to say, we're going to change the electoral system. We're going to go from we're going to go from a primary where you vote for whatever candidate you want. We're going to go to a caucus. And in building up to that, we're going to have these councils. So everybody that's running for office, all the full spectrum on the ballot, you're going to have to come in before these precinct people and state your case. Otherwise, they're not going to let you on the ballot. Your name's not going to get on the ballot. That doesn't stop you from a write-in, but that's a tough situation. So what I've seen is we're starting to treat those people as though they need help. And the help that they need is to laugh a little bit at themselves. I was telling Matt last night that I, of all people in the history of the state, never thought I'd be called a socialist. And later on, I was sanctioned by my party, Governor. It was sanctioned by, here I brought them through one of the toughest recoveries in gold shape and never raised a tax, and we led the nation out of the recession. And anyway, they for some reason or another, they got this idea that not only was I a socialist, I was a rhino. So I told Matt which is Republican in name only. So I told Matt last night, when they asked me if I was a rhino, somebody in the media, in the published media, not the vocal media, asked me if I was a rhino, I said, yes, I'm a rational individual with noble objectives. And it made a difference. I didn't respond to their characterization of who I was. I just responded because I thought, well, if I had to use that as an acronym, what would I be? I'd be a rational individual with noble objectives. And so I think that's what we're starting to see happen. And I see it at the grassroots because out of the 800 and some precincts, we won 720.
So we could go on much, much longer from this group of wise people. I think we've just heard 8 messages that we can take and give us food for thought and give us inspiration. So let's thank each one of these governors for what they've had to say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. So good to see you. Sorry you were late.
All right, and I know Judy has to make a flight, so Judy, thank you for making the trip out here, and we appreciate it. So a round of applause and for our governors. And then I'm going to invite our former executive directors up for our next panel. Judy.